If there's one major feature that bridges have in common, it's that they go places, across a road, a ravine, or a river. Now, you might think that a bridge that doesn't do that is kind of useless. Well, not in this case. I'm on the Mississippi River, and this is a bridge that only goes halfway across. And in this case, it's a feature. So here's the strange backstory about how this bridge came to be, and why the local community spent over $2 million on a bridge to nowhere. Let's go. The Mississippi River runs across America from its north up here in Minnesota all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. Now, the earliest permanent bridge was one that dates back to 1855, and that was here in Minneapolis. Now, that bridge has since been replaced multiple times, and it's now the Hennepin Avenue Bridge. And these days, there are over 100 bridges that cross the Mississippi, and one of them was right here. This is the Rock Island Swing Bridge, and it was built in the 1860s as railroads were expanding. So it was decided that there should be a bridge around here near the Minnesota city of St. Paul. And what they put in was pretty innovative at the time. It was a swing bridge that was double-decker. So trains were on top and cars would be down here. Now I say cars, but it wasn't originally built for cars, it was built for horses and carriages. Now that led to some issues. First, if you have a look, it's pretty narrow. So cars could fit in going in either direction, but it was pretty tight. And in different times in its life, they actually had it so cars would only go one way at a time. And when it was built, it was the longest span swing bridge in the world. And yes, at the time, it crossed the entirety of the Mississippi. Now, in the early years, the bridge was a success and it helped grow some of this area, including a lot of the businesses nearby. But eventually, competition and increasing costs, particularly after World War II, led for the railroad to decline. And the company declared bankruptcy and was liquidated in 1980. Now, something that happened, and I wouldn't have necessarily thought to do it, is that an entrepreneur bought this bridge. And they bought it with the goal of turning it into a toll bridge. Now, this was such a new concept for the state at the time that the government actually had to pass a law to allow this to happen, because it had never happened in the state's history. So this was a toll bridge for a couple of decades, just for cars. By then, the trains had stopped running, and the way it would work is you'd pay 75 cents and cross the river. Now, after that happening for around 2 decades, in the year 1999, it was worked out that there was a defect in one of the beams. So by having a bad beam, they had to stop this for traffic pretty much immediately. Now, the cost to get it fixed was gonna be expensive. We're talking $11 million or so, and they just couldn't afford to do that. So what happened is the bridge was eventually handed back to the government. Now, the question is then, what do you do with a bridge that doesn't work as a bridge? Well, it turns out very little for the first 10 years. It fell further into disrepair, people would come and graffiti and cause issues with it, but one of the things they did is have the Parks Department do tours of it. And eventually, around this time, there was some parts of it that actually fell down. This whole area was out of bounds. And then a county engineer at the time called it a rusty bucket of bolts, so it wasn't in very good shape. Eventually, though, a decision had to be made. So one choice was to repair it, but the cost was going to be, as I said, over $10 million. Eventually, the decision was made that they had to demolish it. There were a few reasons for that. Partly is that there's a refinery across the river, and they started to use the land directly opposite. So what that meant is that it was harder to get through, and in line with that, also further north is the Wakota Bridge. Now this thing is massive, it's a 10-lane interstate. So basically there wasn't the need that there once was for a bridge to be located right here. But there's nothing like seeing a piece of history vanish before your eyes to get people motivated to take action. So there was a last-ditch effort that sprung into place to save as much of the bridge as possible. So there was a moratorium put in place to stop any further demolition. And with the support of federal government funds and a local historical society, and the city realising that preservation was going to be cheaper than a full removal, the project quickly changed. It went from being a $5 million bridge removal project to a $2.5 million public pier development project. There was certainly a lot of work to get to this point. Lead paint, graffiti removal, and deck renovation after a fire. But now we have this unique space. So it's a 200-metre recreational pier right over the Mississippi. And this is the result. This is Rock Island Swing Bridge Pier, and it's a beautiful place for families to come, for fishing, for walks, for bike rides nearby, and even picnics. So this place has transformed to a recreational centre from what was a disused piece of infrastructure. I think it's a really good example where sometimes a bridge to nowhere is exactly where you want to end up. From the middle of the Mississippi, I'm Julian O'Shea. I'm making a little video about the bridge.
Oh, are you?
Yeah.